And I appreciate your letting me go first. I'm going to apologize in advance. I've got another commitment, and so I can only stay for one round here. This is a terrific panel, and you all just great topics that you've hit on and brought some new parts to the conversation. But since I'm only going to get to do this once around this discussion, I wanted to raise another issue that layers into this and ask for your thoughts on it. There's a new report out. I hope you've seen it. It's from Harvard Business School professors Michael Porter and Jan Rivkin. And the report is called An Economy Doing Half Its Job. Now, here's what the researchers find, and I just want to quote it to make sure we get this exactly right. They find that corporate profits in America are at an all-time high, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average continues to hit new records. But living standards for the average American have fallen over the last 15 years. Porter and Rivkin from the Harvard Business School note that this recent divergence of outcomes with firms, especially larger firms, thriving and workers struggling is unusual in the United States because, quote, American companies and citizens have tended either to thrive together or to suffer together, but no more. Now, there's a pretty simple explanation for this recent divergence. Corporations no longer share their prosperity with their workers. They share their prosperity only with their shareholders. According to research by Professor William Lazonick of the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, back in the early 1980s, large corporations dedicated less than half their earnings to their shareholders. The rest went to investment in their equipment and in their employees. But from 2003 to 2012, those big companies dedicated 91% of their earnings to their shareholders, either in the form of stock buybacks or dividend payments. Now, why have companies shifted their priorities so dramatically in such a short period of time? Well, because CEOs are now compensated almost entirely based on the company's share price. As a result, CEOs love buybacks and dividend payments because they boost share prices, even if they come at the expense of long-term investments in the company and in its workers. So here's my question. If we can't count on CEOs and senior management to reinvest at least some of the corporate profits in their workers like they used to, what steps should the government take to fill that void? And I'd like to hear from all of you. Ms. McGhee, would you like to start?
Thank you, Senator Warren. That is an excellent question, and it really goes to the heart of what our economy is for. Demos has been doing some investigation into these issues of how much increasingly large, low-wage employers that are extremely profitable are financializing, essentially, and concentrating the effort, the result of the production of their workers. My colleague, Catherine Roychlin, actually wrote a report on our country's largest private employer, Walmart, who spent $6.6 billion just last year buying back its own stock in the market. And she calculated that if that money were instead invested in the human capital of the workers who make that wealth, it could give the lowest paid workers, those who make under $12.25 an hour, which is almost 1 million Walmart workers, a raise of over $5 an hour, just from what they spend buying back their own shares. So this has a very, very real effect on the working lives of workers and families. So some of the things that government can do.
You have to say, and to think about what it would mean if that million workers made $5 more an hour in terms of what they could buy elsewhere in the economy, and the overall growth in the economy and growth in jobs. Growth in demand, growth in jobs.
Exactly.
Sorry, Ms. McGhee, I didn't mean
No, absolutely, because low-paid workers are the job creators who are waiting to have more money in their pockets to spend in our economy. I'll just say a few things that could be done. One, Congress could stop giving preferential treatment to this kind of income, to wealth income, stocks and dividends over work. It's important to remember that less than half of Americans own any stock at all. So when we give this preferential treatment, we have to remember to whom it's going. The part of the picture of that declining ability for the people who are actually doing the work to get a bigger slice of the pie that they spend all day baking is the decline in unionization, which has also been as a result of policy choices. So Congress could pass, for example, the Employee Free Choice Act and make sure that there is more collective bargaining power in our economy and in our enterprises. Thinking about all of that money that unfortunately is not going to the public good in many, many cases, you have to look at the effective corporate tax rate. Their Institute for Policy Studies shows that 26 of our biggest corporations paid their CEOs more than they paid to the government in taxes. So we should be closing tax loopholes and havens and ensuring that corporations, which are at an all-time high in profitability, are sharing some of that revenue, and we can make a new commitment to the quality of life of all Americans.
Thank you very much. You may have covered a lot here. Dr. Sufi, we're over, but would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think another way of saying the same facts that Professor Porter and his co-author are saying is that the capital share of income, the amount of income that is going to the owners of capital, has gone up dramatically over the last 15 years. And in just thinking about the reasons for that, one reason I think is that capital markets have become quite ruthless in the sense that they want profits and they want them in the short term. And I think, Senator Warren, you're exactly right that we may worry, and I think there is research to back this up, that it excessively leads managers to focus on short-term gains rather than more longer-term investments, such as job training, such as trying to boost the productivity of their workers, which I think is the best way ultimately to try to get wages and income up. So I think going forward, as I mentioned before, I think expansion of the earned income tax credit, I think public infrastructure projects. It's amazing to me the consensus among economists, even economists at the University of Chicago who I sit down at lunch with, we would all consider quite right-leaning, say, look, interest rates are zero, basically, and there may be very good infrastructure projects to do. It may help with this labor share problem. And it seems like that consensus is not here on Capitol Hill, but you definitely see it among economists. I think those are the solutions I would point to.
Thank you. Ms. Viek, would you like to add to it?
I'd like to just repeat or sort of say certainly closing the tax loopholes and reinvesting in human capital. Small business entrepreneurs it's human capital, and that's what communities need today. I think also looking at perhaps, and this doesn't quite address what you're saying, but there are funds that could be used to help deal with this home equity issue, which is has a huge impact, and then also reducing student debt. Again, if you close tax loopholes and you have more income, let's invest in young people, and so that they don't have to increase their debt to go to university.
Thank you, Ms. Viek. And Dr. Hersh.
I would reiterate and agree with most of what's been said here on the panel so far, and I think that there's a very simple answer to your question of if the private sector is not willing to invest, even though their corporate sector is holding more than $2 trillion in cash reserves, even though they can borrow billions at essentially zero interest rates right now and are sitting on this cash rather than doing something productive with it. If they're not willing to invest, then the public sector has a role to step up and invest. There is no shortage of public goods and public services investments that will increase the productive capacity of the U.S. economy and create jobs that will lead to rising incomes and the aggregate demand that will then crowd in investment from businesses. When they see a growing market, the investment will come to serve that market. And while we're in this time of high unemployment, high excess capacity in the productive economy, this is really the way that we're going to get out of this spot.
Well, thank you very much. Those are very, very thoughtful answers, and I very much appreciate it. You know, my Republican colleagues like to say a rising tide lifts all boats. And what they're saying is if we create the environment where corporations and investors thrive, then working families will thrive too. We now have 2 decades of hard evidence disproving that theory. corporations may be turning their backs on their workers, but that doesn't mean that the American government should do the same. We can do better than this, and you've given us some great ideas to work with. Thank you.